Your alternative talk radio contact. The Planet. KGRAradio.com.
With infinite complacency, people went to and fro of the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Welcome to another episode of Into the Fray, leering at you from the woodline. Visit the mothership at intothefrayradio.com. There you can find all the episodes, the blog posts, ITF gear, and sign up for the free guest newsletter. The weekly show is, of course, always free and available in all podcatchers, but if you'd like to support the show, and why wouldn't you, go to the website and click Become an Insider, which in turn gets you extra content each and every month. And by the way, if you would be so kind as to leave a rating and review in your listening platform of choice, Cosmic Karma shall be yours. Be part of the discussion by joining the interactive ITF Facebook group, follow on Twitter at ITF_radio, and Instagram. If you have an experience that you'd like to share, email Shannon at intothefrayradio.com or call the hotline anytime at 844-866-3366. Thanks so much for listening. Now, if you would be so kind, buckle up your safety belts. Put that tray table in the upright position. Liftoff is upon us.
Nice. Well, yeah, let me do a little proper intro before we dive into that, but I just wanted to apologize because it's not my norm to not read the book prior to. I'm still going to get it, of course, but I usually am up on these things a little more than I am this time. So, but the book is Vermont Bigfoot Encounters and Beyond. Now, you're writing under a pen name, though.
Yes, I was going to get to that.
Yeah.
My real name is Jason Lorifice, my name on Facebook, just to avoid all the trolls.
Gotcha. Very smart. Mm-hmm.
But somehow they still managed to keep me out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know how that goes. In fact, your cover photo says something like, "Oh, hey, stalker, how's it going? Thanks for checking up on me." Right? Because you can block people, and then they're so creepy that they actually will create another account just to like find you. It's so losery. It's so disgusting. Yeah. People are just pathetic.
Yeah. So that was going on for a little while, and now it seems to be, calm and quiet.
That's always nice, right? We probably shouldn't talk about it. It'll get stirred up again. No, I totally understand that. So if they want to search for you on Amazon, of course, you can look for the title of the book. Again, it's Vermont Encounters and Beyond. And then spell out your last name so that people can type that right into the search bar of Amazon.
Lorifice.
Perfect. Cool. Thank you. Well, yeah, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. What's that?
Oh, no problem. It's available on Amazon, but I just want to mention that there are some resellers out there selling it on eBay for a higher price.
Oh, my God.
So avoid eBay. It happens.
So you are a paranormal researcher to, like, find you. It's so losery. It's so disgusting. Yeah. People are just pathetic.
Yeah, so that was going on for a little while, and now it seems to be, calm and quiet.
That's always nice, right? We probably shouldn't talk about it. It'll get stirred up again. No, I totally understand that. So if they want to search for you on Amazon, of course, you can look for the title of the book. Again, it's Vermont Encounters and Beyond. And then spell out your last name so that people can type that right into the search bar of Amazon.
Lorifice.
Perfect. Cool. Thank you. Well, yeah, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. What's that?
Oh, no problem. It's available on Amazon, but I just want to mention that there are some resellers out there selling it on eBay for a higher price.
Oh, my God.
So avoid eBay. It happens.
So you are a paranormal researcher and also a former private investigator, which is very cool. 10 years investigating, and you have personally investigated and documented several different cases, especially specific to Bigfoot, to Sasquatch, right?
Mainly, that's my primary interest right now is Bigfoot, Bigfoot and UFOs. I've done ghost research, paranormal. I've collected numerous EVPs from places, but Bigfoot seems to be my passion because I've always had an interest in that ever since I was a kid.
Have you had any experiences or anything you can't quite explain that might have been a Bigfoot?
I've had a sighting, and I've had a rocks thrown at me.
Well,
I'll tell you about my sighting.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind. Yeah, absolutely.
So, the rocks that were thrown at me took place up in the Adirondacks. Now, I never saw what it was that made that, but it was a road that I parked in, and I took a trail up there. And this was kind of late in the afternoon. It was 2012, and I'm going up a trail, and there's a small pond to the right of me, and I stopped, and I felt this. I heard this rock going kaplunk into the water. I looked around, couldn't figure out which direction it came from, and I thought it was maybe a hiker playing a prank, and then a minute later, another one came, but another one was still a bit larger. This time I saw where it came from. It came from the woods. And I couldn't see into the wood line because it was the middle of July, and the vegetation was very dense at that time of year. And I stood there, and I'm standing towards the direction watching it, and then a minute later, another one comes sailing out of the woods, probably, about maybe this half of a soccer ball. And it lands just a few feet right in front of me. It hits the pond. I got splashed with water from that. And I yelled, some profanities at them. And I said, all right, I wasn't thinking Bigfoot. I was thinking, whomever. And then another one came out of the woods, probably about the size of my head, this rock was. And I paused and I said, wait a minute. On my best day, I couldn't launch that thing 10 feet, and this thing was going maybe 50 yards at least. And I had a machete with me because I can't carry firearms in the state of New York. So I'm walking towards the woods, and I heard a rustling around in the woods. It was kind of like someone was moving around, and I kind of stopped, and I had this aha moment where I said to myself, do I really want to find out what that was and confront it? So I stopped and turned around, and I walked backwards. And as I'm walking down the trail, I heard what sounded to be like a tuning fork sound in the woods. It was emanating from the woods, and it was circling me.
Yeah, that's weird.
And I said, well, I got to get back to my car because I'm losing daylight, and it's probably going to get dark within another 45 minutes. And as I'm walking further down the trail, I hear footsteps pacing me. It was paralleling me. And every time I would stop, it would stop. And when I would start walking, it would start walking. And I'm walking down the hill and walking down the trail. And, eventually it got to the point where it just no longer kept up to me because now I'm coming out into the clearing where bar is at. And I looked around, and again, I never saw the suspect or who or what it could have been. So that was just another story I kind of logged into my research.
Boy, the guy I just talked to today, the second interview, had the same thing happen to him and a friend. They were being paced. The rock came first, and then they decided to leave, and then they were being followed out. We hear that a lot. That's kind of their go-to, right? Were you out there for purposes of Bigfoot?
Yes, I was actually, and this is an area that I've been to, 5 or 6 times before, and so I've been out there, a few times previous to that, and I went there once after with a friend because I didn't want to go back alone the second time, and we didn't find anything the second time, but it was just an area of interest that I marked on my map, and now it's an area of higher interest because of my experience there.
Well, yeah, if you don't mind getting into that. Your sighting.
The sighting took place in southern Vermont. This was an area just not too far from Castleton. This happened in 2015, And I was parked up there, and this is an area that I've been to, again, maybe 20, 25 times at least. And I found, every time I go up there, I find odd-looking stick structures in the woods. And you have trees that are fallen, and they're dragged somewhere, and then they're rested on top of an existing tree. And a lot of times they're tilted in like a teepee fashion. Mm-hmm. There was a nest that I found just recently in an area not too far from there. But this was in 2015. I'm sitting there. It's probably early August. I want to say it must have been like 12:30 at night, and the sky was clear. So I'm laying on the hood of my car, and I'm looking right up at the stars, and hoping to see a couple of shooting stars. But roughly about, I'm saying like maybe a half hour later, I heard this just god-awful, blood-curdling scream. And the best way to describe it would be, it sounded like a cross between a woman screaming and an air raid siren. And that kind of shook me to the core, because I stood up and I said, what the hell was that? Mm-hmm. I've never heard of that. And luckily for me, I had my .44 Magnum with me, so I had my hand on my gun. And I said, well, that sounded like it was maybe at least a half a mile or so down the road. And the ironic thing is that even the crickets in the woods stopped. I didn't notice that until seconds later. I'm saying, what happened to all the wildlife? It's almost as if someone hit the mute button on the woods. So about a minute later, it starts up again. And I said, I don't know what that is, but it sounds like it's coming in my direction. Now, half of me was scared, and the other half wanted to know what it was. So I'm kind of a daredevil at times. So I got in my car, and I rolled all my windows down, and I started down the road. This was a dirt road, so I couldn't really go too fast, any more than maybe 10 miles an hour with all the bumps and potholes. And I'm kind of sticking my head out, looking for anything that may have been. And as I'm saying I must have gotten maybe 3/4 of a mile down the road. As I'm coming to a bend in the dirt road, I see a black object off on the left-hand side of me. And I thought it was a tree stump. And I said, how the hell did that get there? That wasn't there when I came up here. Well, as soon as my high beams hit it, the thing stood up. It took two strides across the road, and it was gone and into the woods. And I didn't see its face, because I looked at the side view angle of it, and it must have been, I'm guessing it must have had to have been 10, 15 feet in front of me. And if I was going any faster, I would have hit him. And I think it was a male. And this thing had to have been the better part of 8 feet in height. It was dark brown. It was almost black, like a light black, dark brown color. I mean, the build on this thing was just gigantic. I mean, the legs, I saw the legs flexing as it strided across the road. As I'm passing it, because I had my windows down, I could hear it I can hear sticks and branches breaking in the woods as it was taken off into the woods.
Oh my gosh.
And one thing I noticed is that the hair in this thing was just kind of gnarled, matted down, and it had flakes of, I don't know, maybe dirt. It looked like something that was living in the dirt. And I'm driving, and I'm keeping going. I didn't stop, so I just kept on going. And when I got to the bottom of the hill, I had both hands on the steering wheel, and both of my hands were shaking. I couldn't stop myself. My forearms were shaking. I had like this muscle twitch in my arms. I couldn't stop shaking, and I just kind of battered myself mentally to figure out, did I just see what I thought I just saw? And I'm sitting in my car for about a minute or so, maybe more. It seemed like it was an hour. And I got home, and I haven't told anyone about this for a good 6 to 8 months afterwards. But when I did tell someone, I just gave the bare bones of why, and the person said, "Oh, someone's playing a joke on you." And I said, "Well, that's interesting, because first of all, nobody knew I was up there, and second of all, I'd really much like to meet the person that can fill a costume that large."
Right.
I mean, this thing was the better half of 8 feet, and I'm guessing 700 pounds
Oh my God.
in weight. I mean,
Did it ever
you
glance
will not
over at
find-
you, or was it always looking towards where it was going?
That I don't know, because its head was above the my windshield.
Oh wow.
The car I have, I've got a Dodge sedan, so the the visibility on this was is slightly low. So if I'm really close at a red light, I could stick my face up to the windshield and look, and that's
Right.
what I would have had
Okay.
to do if to see this. So
Gotcha. You've got a Charger or something then, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've been in I love Chargers, by the way. I want to get a 392 one of these days.
those are great.
Oh my God, I fell in love with that car. It's, the Hemi Charger just to rent, and I had never actually driven a Hemi before, and I fell in love with it. But now I'm looking around town, I'm like, oh, the 392s. I think that's the beast for me next. But I could see where being in that Charger, the hood is really long on it, and then I could see where if something was tall, that you just wouldn't be able to actually see it unless you leaned forward. So holy cow.
Right.
Oh, I'm just trying to that. So interesting about the dirt clumps in the hair. You said it just kind of looked disheveled and dirty, like it was living definitely on the ground in the woods.
Yeah, it didn't look like it was well kept. And I got a friend, he's like 6'6". He's the tall, skinny, lengthy type. And I said, do me a favor, because I was talking to him one day. I said, stand right over there. And as I sit in my car, and I wanted to recreate the scene, and he was far too. This thing would have dwarfed him.
What kind of arm swing did it have going on? It took 2 steps and it was across the road, right? So did it have big arm swing and the whole nine?
I remember the right arm, because it was going from my left side to the right into the woods. So I got a glance at its right arm. Its right arm kind of swung back, and it did kind of have like a forward lean to it. Not too much, but God, this thing was tall.
What about the hand? Did you get a good look at that right hand then?
I didn't. I know I did see its glutes, its ass cheeks, lack of a better word, and it didn't really have a whole lot around that area.
Huh.
The legs were hairy, and they were just hairy to the point where you could actually see muscles flexing as it moved. In the back, I remember seeing the back move. It didn't have a lot of hair on back, but it was still covered. And I did see that it had, that the lats on the back muscles were very well defined.
God, can you imagine what those things could do if they wanted to?
That thing, looking at it, I said that thing could have easily tipped over my car.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have had a problem. And then I started looking at my gun later on, and I said, I don't think a .44 Magnum would have been sufficient enough to stop one of those things.
Unless you got like the shot, right?
If you made it a headshot, maybe. I've heard so many stories about these things that have the bone density in their chest is so thick that it acts as a body armor. I have no reason to doubt that.
Could be, right? We don't know.
But, yeah, I've heard. We've all heard stories of people that have shot one before, and every time that happens, and I think this is the reason why we haven't found a body yet, is because whenever that happens, there's always a second, third, or fourth one in the area, and they tend to take that one into safety somewhere.
Maybe that's why they always seem so confident when we finally do get a glimpse of them. They, unlike the Dogman, I was just saying this today earlier, that the Dogman seems to not really give a shit if you see it. They're a little bit more brazen. But when the Bigfoot do finally step out, they don't, it's not like they're usually hauling ass to get out of the way. It's just like, all right, well, he saw me, I'm just going to mosey on. It only took him 2 steps, but it's not like he was seeming very stressed out. So I tend to agree. I just think that they're always kind of, they know that their buddies or their family group is close and they got this.
Yeah. And, the Dogmen seem to not care. They seem to be more, arrogant in the sense. And they
arrogant's a good word, yeah.
In almost every single case of Dogmen that I've read so far. And when I to the Dogman Encounters Radio, there's a guy, Vic Cundiff, I think is his name. These stories, none of these stories are pleasant stories. They're always, light terrifying to extremely terrifying. There's nothing positive from these stories. And when it comes to Bigfoot, you can get a mixed bag of results, from anywhere from comical to silly to questionable to terrifying. But I seem to have a theory that the ones that tend to toy with people, such as roadside encounters, I seem to think that those may be the teenagers or the juveniles, in a sense, because, they're the ones, and like all teenagers, we're all full of testosterone at one time, so we're daring, we're bold, and we like to play with things, and we like to taunt other people at that age. And I seem to think that that's what they're doing when people have these roadside encounters, which is, hey, let's run out in front of that car and scare or, hey, let's go bang on that guy's cabin and scare the hell out of him like we did last week.
Right.
But and almost every time this happens, the eyewitnesses, they describe them to be anywhere from 6.5, 7 to maybe even 8 feet in height. We know they get taller than that. We know that they can get at least 10 feet in height. And I seem to think that the older ones, the elder Sasquatches, they don't do that kind of thing because they know better.
Do you think that Sasquatch at all end up, when we get older and our posture changes, we almost seem to basically shrink and, bone density changes and all that. Do you think that happens to Bigfoot as they age, that maybe they do reach 10 feet, but at the end of the day, maybe their splendor is a little bit diminished?
I wish I could have a positive answer to that. I seem to think that they are built differently. Their skeletal structure is designed different than ours. I think that their posture of walking, having a forward lean, is just natural for them, because if you look at some of these, take the Patterson Bigfoot film for once. If you examine that, you'll know that the morphology is just virtually impossible for that to be a person in a costume. The arm length is a lot longer from shoulder to elbow. The legs and the knees, the knee bends are not quite up to par with a human, and so if you try and fit someone in a costume, you're not going to get an elbow bend in the same areas as those. I think it's just a completely redesigned creature. And when it comes to posture, they're not going to be the same. Primates have different postures than humans. We are the upright primates, but there's others out there that live among us in the woods, and I think they are slightly different than us. So if you want to refer to them as our cousins, well, that works too.
Your sighting was, pretty recent, 2015. Comparatively to other people's. How did that change you since then? You go out armed, which I completely agree with, but, when you go to these states that you can't be armed, whether it's open carry or not, they don't give a crap, you're not going out. How does that make you feel? Or do you just not go into those areas anymore knowing what's out there?
Well, in the state of New York, you can actually get, if you have a rifle, you can actually get a hunting permit. Okay. In the state of New York. So sometimes during hunting season, depending on what you're going to get, carry a gun in the woods with you, but you can't carry a handgun. Rifles, yes. Handguns, no.
I didn't know about that.
New York is,
that's too bad.
Yeah. Well, New York is, it's everything's illegal in New York. They're one of those screwy states.
Yeah, I totally agree with going out armed, and it's not just, like we were conjecturing, would it even matter to the Bigfoot? You'd probably have to get the perfect shot off. But there's other things in the woods that are freaking scary, including crazy people. So I completely agree with going out armed. Yeah.
Yeah, and you never know what you're going to run into, and I think Bigfoot would be the least of your concerns if you're in the woods.
Yeah, usually they just try to avoid us, so it's not usually an issue with the Bigfoot at all.
If you ever see that movie, The Hills Have Eyes? That makes you want to go into the woods armed. Yeah.
It's so weird you just said that, because I just said that to the guy that I recorded with earlier today. We were talking about the same thing about going armed into the woods, and I'm like, does no one watch The Hills Have Eyes? That's a true story. People don't realize that, and I'm like, that would really happen. Not exactly like the movie shows, but that is a true story. Look it up. It's a great reason to go out. Or, man, that's a really incredible sighting. Would you want to encounter that again? Did you like, this might be a dumb question, but that scenario, did you like it, or would you like to see one closer, or when you're not in a vehicle?
Being that I was in a vehicle, I kind of felt safe, but looking at the sheer size of this thing, knowing that thing could have hit my car over, I think there really is any safe scenario to see one unless you're, like, say, from a helicopter.
Right.
Anything else? But, I will say this, I didn't get the impression or sensation that this thing wanted to harm me. I just felt like it just was just trying to get away and avoid me.
Yeah.
And that gives me peace of mind. I mean, if it wanted me, it would have had me easy. And I think that handgun that people carry with them will just simply be an iron teddy bear.
Oh, I like that analogy. Yeah. I could just see where if it wanted to, it could probably just put one hand out and then stand its ground. You would have been stopped, and then it could have just done whatever the hell it wanted to you.
Yeah, and these missing cases, some of them go back to the David Paulides books, and I read some of these, and I gotta admire that guy. He has really caught on to something over the years in his research, and reading some of his cases, they're right scary. But I seem to think that maybe a third, maybe less than a third of these cases would be Bigfoot related, while a lot of these other cases seem like, by all practical purpose, they sound like alien abductions.
Right. Yeah.
Because whatever is taking these people has a near 100% success rate. We never hear about the failed attempts of these abductions. It knows the who, the where, and the when to make their move. And you're in the woods and someone gets 50 yards ahead of you or 50 yards behind you, and you turn around and they're gone. They're not there. And days later, they're found in an area that was previously searched 20, 30, 40 times. It's almost as if that the person that was there, that was taken, was brought back to find or to view.
Isn't it so strange also how a lot of the people that they actually make it out alive and they get found, they happen to be people that they're mentally diminished and they can't really even talk about what happened to them. There would be really, no offense, but no point in pressing them because they can't even express what's gone on. And I find it really terrifying that some of these people are thousands of feet up a mountain and their clothes aren't dirty. They're not scraped up. They just look like you said, like they got, picked up by a craft or something and then just deposited there and they're totally fine. It's just the strangest thing. And the time-wise, right? Like, how would they even cover that kind of ground in that time?
Yeah, and, one of the interesting things that David has discovered is when people are found or found alive, a lot of times their articles of clothing, almost always their shoes are missing. Sometimes some of their clothing is missing. And most of the time the people that are, found alive, they either can't remember or they don't want to talk about it. When kids are found, they tell these really, really bizarre stories. I mean, you'll have a case where a kid is found not one but two mountain ranges away from his original disappearance site 12 hours later by search and rescue. Well, something carried him.
How about the story of the kid that says that there was one case where he said the bears took care of him. The other one where he said his grandma was in the cave, but something was wrong with her, and there was like the bolts and the, what he didn't call it light. Did he call it lightning? Anyway, there was like sparks or something.
More like spark.
Yeah, crazy. I mean, what is that?
That was, I remember him talking about that on Coast to Coast AM.
Right.
And that was down in the Great Smoky Mountains, it was out in Mount Shasta. Yeah, it was Mount Shasta out in California. Apparently the kid was taken into a cave, and he said he saw some old guns on the side of the cave, and people that were on the side that were not moving. He said they looked like us. And someone that looked like his grandmother was talking to him, and he says, now that I think about it, I don't think that was my grandma because she had some weird sparks coming from her head, and she held out a piece of fly paper, and she went in to crap on it.
Right.
And the really interesting thing about that case is that the original grandmother claimed that she was camping up there a couple weeks previous to that incident, and when she woke up, she had this sore on the back of her, almost like these puncture wounds.
Yeah.
So, then you got to ask yourself,
DNA sample?
DNA.
Yeah.
DNA extraction of some kind.
Yeah, some of these stories have such crossovers, and like you said, I do respect David because he's never come out and said what he thinks, and I think that's a smart move. And people give him a lot of shit for it. I respect his stance on not saying what he thinks it is. I'm sure he has plenty of idea what he himself would like to as, or maybe he's like it could be a few different things.
I'm sure he's formed his own opinion as to what some of these cases are, but if you go public like that and say, I think some of these are ET,
I respect his stance on not saying what he thinks it is. I'm sure he has plenty of idea what he himself would like to as, or maybe he's like it could be a few different things.
I'm sure some of these cases are, but if you go public like that and say, I think some of these are ET, the public is in the heart, so I can understand him wanting to keep that for himself.
Yeah. Oh, people just love to, bitch about everything. So it's like, oh, well, David doesn't want to tell us what he thinks it is, so we're going to, boycott, or anytime his name comes up, it's just vitriol. And you're like, oh my God, no, people just stop. Like, you would never be able to handle all what he goes through every day, I'm sure, so.
Oh, no. And, I can see a different angle of that is that a lot of the victim's family, don't want to hear that it was Bigfoot or there was aliens. They want some sort of solid, tangible answer. And when someone comes out and says that, I can understand keeping that.
Yeah, I think somebody would see it as very disrespectful. If all of a sudden people are saying that they're assuming that, oh, your child was abducted by aliens and they did horrible things to him and then dropped him back off on a mountain. I mean, that's not really something that they want to hear about. And that's why David also would never do that, because it wouldn't be respectful. And he's always been very respectful to the families.
And he said himself, personally, he said, I've met too many of the victims' families, and I don't want to do that to them.
Right.
And I can completely understand that.
Yeah. One last question about your Bigfoot sighting, because it always fascinates me about, and I know you didn't see the face, but would you want to have seen the face?
I'm not too sure about that. Maybe I don't want to. I've talked to people that have seen their face, and I'll give you an example of one person down in Rutland, Vermont, had a sighting back in 2014, and it was not too far from where I had my sighting. He describes it as just this really scary-looking face because he saw it in his yard, and I guess his dog was barking, and something tripped the outside light, and he went out to check out what it was, and something was just going through his shed, and it looked at him, and it had he said it had a pronounced brow ridge, it had big black eyes like an owl, and it just kind of looked and snarled at him. So I don't know. I've met other people that have encounters with them too, including a 9-year-old girl just last year had a sighting.
Oh gosh, a 9-year-old? What was hers like?
Well, it went something like this. See, I got a Facebook page, Vermont Bigfoot Research Group. Once in a while, someone will contact me, and I'd probably get an average of one a month. They usually ask me something, or they tell me something. More often, they're asking me something, and the mother, without giving too much information because they want to remain anonymous, they just moved in from out of state. I guess the woman is a school teacher, and the 9-year-old daughter had a bedroom downstairs facing the backyard, and the mother noticed that the daughter was closing her window in the middle of July and August. And the mother was asking her, "Hey, honey, why are you closing your window? It's 80 degrees out." And she said, "Because the big gorilla keeps coming around bothering me." And of course, the mother is thinking bear. And she's like, "Well, what are you talking about?" And apparently she was describing how it comes right up to the house, taps on her window, and growls at her. So I'm talking to her via email, and a couple weeks later, I'm lucky enough to meet with them. And I asked the little girl, I said, what did it look like? Did you see its face? And she went on describing had big black eyes like an owl. She said the eyes were like the size of a silver dollar. They were big and black, and she said the eyebrows were big and thick. That the top of the cranium, looked like a football helmet, which is what we call a sagittal crest. It did have that conical shape to it. It had a flat nose but wide nostrils. The nostrils were really large. The lips were flat but wide. Didn't have any facial hair, but it had hair around its neck and shoulders. And I asked her, I said, point to where the top of the head, because we're standing in her bedroom, and I had her point to the window as to where the top of the head was when you saw it. And I went outside and measured. It was at least a good 7.5 feet, if not higher, in length from ground up. So whatever it was really large. And I was showing her some pictures. I said, does it look like this? No. I said, and I showed her a picture. She goes, no, that's a bear. And I showed her the picture of the Patterson-Gimlin film picture, where it's the famous one where it's got its arm swings and it's looking at the camera, and her eyes just widened up, and she said, that's the thing that keeps coming into our yard. So the mother practically had a nervous breakdown at that time. The father eventually set up some cameras and some outside lights, and I tell people, if you ever want to deter what around your area, set up trail cams. They will avoid those like the plague.
Yeah, they certainly seem to. It's terrible for the little girl. Every night that thing would come in.
It wasn't every night, but it was I asked them how many times it would come in. It's like, a couple of times a week. It didn't do that every single night, but it was just kind of like a random thing.
Every once in a while, it's like usually they do their best to avoid us, but sometimes it seems like they do come in for entertainment and to get a rise. I mean, what else would it be doing if it taps on a window to, scare the shit out of a little girl and growl at her? Yeah.
And this thing kind of supports my theory on how the juveniles tend to be a little bit more bold and daring. They will go right up to the house because, again, this one was about roughly 7.5 feet in height. So I'm thinking that this may have been a teenager that took interest in a little girl human. And looking at some of these cases and going from a lot of the cases that involve a family, there's usually always one of them that gets singled out in that group. It's kind of like almost like a demonic paranormal case where they move into a house and one person becomes the target. So in this case, it's most likely, more often than not, a small young girl. And they always take interest in the children over the adults.
So what's your thoughts on that, Jason? Does that worry you that, if you're going to start tying in missing people and such, and some of them might be Bigfoot, does that worry you that they do take interest in children, maybe especially females?
Actually, no, because, this type of phenomenon is new. It's been going on for years, and I seem to think that when they do that, I suspected that this thing may have been trying to lure her outside. And I told that to the father, and the dad was like, well, what would happen if she was outside? And I said, well, you'd probably never see your kid again. But it does kind of give me an uneasy feeling where I do feel for other families out there if they lost their child to something like that, because again, it goes back to the David Paulides cases where, what are you going to say to these people? What are you going to say to the family? That a Sasquatch took them, unless they actually saw it. So that's kind of, I guess you could say, like walking a tightrope.
Right. So that's an ongoing case for you then?
It is. I've just called them like maybe a month and a half ago. So far, so good. Nothing new has happened around there, so I'm going to check in with them probably during summertime.
Has he put up the lights and cameras or anything?
He did. He put on an outside light with a motion sensor, and he was talking about putting up some trail or surveillance cameras. I would recommend surveillance cameras. Those are the ones you can actually mount to the building of the house. So, I mean, the guy seemed to be more of a handyman, so I seem to think that he was serious about what he was doing. So I'll check in with him in another 5 or 6 months from now and see how they're doing.
I mean, did the parents believe the daughter, or are they kind of more skeptical and think she's just misidentifying what she's?
The mother did. The mother, yes. The father was kind of skeptical. The father thinks, well, I still think it may have been a bear. Maybe she didn't quite know what she saw on the other side of the window, and being that it was dark, and they got their theories. the mother is more like, hey, my daughter doesn't make this stuff up. If she says she saw something, then that's exactly what she saw.
I wouldn't be happy if that kind of thing was coming out to my house and messing with my kid, that's for sure. I'd be like, come to my window. Leave her alone.
That would give me an uneasy feeling, too.
So, Jason, what's your feeling on what Bigfoot is, especially since you've seen one? What do you think they are?
I'm going to be... I'm going to go on board with Melba Ketchum's finding in saying that they are human hybrids, because of her studies that she's done in the past years to come. I mean, she's had numerous hair samples tested from all over the place, and she did not do these testings herself. She sent them out to respectable laboratories. I think GenBanks was one of them, and when they discovered the mitochondria, which only comes from your mother, is 100% human. They said, all right, well, let's run with it. Let's test the nucleus of the DNA. They found it to be 90% human and 10% unknown. And it's that 10% that they can't match it with any known species. So it's possible at one time a human female breeded with an unknown that is now extinct. Again, I mean, I can't argue with the science of DNA. If that's what she claims it to be, then I'm just going to have to take her word for it. I really, actually, my heart goes out to her because, she really dedicated herself to this work, and people just kicked the crap out of her because of it.
Yeah, it seems to be mainly across the Bigfoot community. They just love to do that to anybody. It's brutal, man.
Yeah, and, I think it falls into that category where they may have rattled a few cages along the way, because a lot of these old researchers want to believe that Bigfoot is some sort of undiscovered species of ape. And when Shawn told them what she found, it wasn't what they wanted to hear. And as well as I do, the Bigfoot world is a world full of hate. There's a lot of people out there that call themselves researchers that just want to belittle everyone, because after all, it's easy to say something negative, but it's hard to say something positive.
Right.
And when a scientist comes along and sees all of this drama going on, why would anyone want to get involved in that?
Yeah, all they have to do is take a peek in just a small handful of the Bigfoot groups, and they would run screaming as quickly as they could. It's a community that just eats itself alive very quickly.
It is. And, I seem to think that if these researchers spent more time researching instead of trashing and pissing on other people, maybe they might get something done.
Yeah, the egomaniacs.
It is. It's part of the ego. That these people always want to be first. They want to be the first one to make that discovery. They want to be the first one to get that piece of undisputed evidence. And it's kind of like a race. And I seem to think that if one of these creatures is found and brought into the public, I think that will open up a huge can of worms in so many different ways.
Do you think we need a whole body, or do you think if somebody found, a good portion of a hand or a foot, or, that's a whole nother discussion on, what they do with their dead and this and that. But, I mean, what's your thoughts on that? Do we need an entire type specimen, or a good chunk would be good? Or sufficient, I should say.
I seem to think that they would need a full body, because there's many hoaxers in the past 10 years that, there's those two idiots that stuffed a ape costume with, I think it was deer carcass, and then they froze it. So if you have a hand, first thing you'd want to do is have that tested for DNA. Now, if you gave that to the state to have it tested and examined, well, that specimen is probably going to vanish.
Yeah, knowing what the history is, right? If we're gonna go down that rabbit hole, it's kind of like, the three-letter agency swooping in and this and that. I think you're right. You'd have to go down the right avenues and make sure that the thing is actually protected. I'm sure that even that would be quite the crapshoot that thing would actually come to light.
Yeah, and if you were to have an actual body specimen, I do know that in the state of California, they passed an ordinance saying it is against the law to shoot or hunt a Bigfoot, and you can be punishable by either $10,000 or 5 years in jail. That law is on the books. So depending on what state you found it in, you might find yourself in a bit of legal trouble if you were the finder of something like that.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if it's a good thing to, have laws like that because, I mean, I'm not trying to get any more emails than I already do sometimes. I do feel like you said, we need a body. I'm not saying go out and hunt them actively or anything. I don't think that maybe is the right thing to do, but, if it was like a life or death situation and you had to shoot it, I just feel like, would someone pause and pull on the trigger because they know it's illegal in their state to shoot one of these things, right? Because then you're looking at manslaughter or whatever the term might be for it.
Yeah, and again, now the secret is out that somebody actually found a Bigfoot. I'm going to ask so many questions of what are they?
Right.
Are they more animal? Are they more human? Because if they're more human, well, now that person might be in some trouble for murder.
Is Melba Ketchum still doing any work? Do you know?
She might be. I'm not quite sure. I haven't heard from her in a couple of years. I know that she was, last I've heard from the grapevine, is that she was testing a hair specimen from what appeared to be a Dogman, and she was trying to get funding from it. And where she went from there, I don't know.
I appreciate you sharing a couple of those Bigfoot stories. Thank you for doing that, especially the
sure.
that recent stuff. That 9-year-old, I feel for them, man. You said they had just moved area too, right? From somewhere else,
right?
They're probably going, really? We just got here.
They came from one of the big cities down south, and moving up here was kind of like a culture shock for them. They've only been here a couple of years.
Oh gosh,
they didn't know what they were getting themselves into.
They might be going back to the big city, huh?
I don't know.
So you mentioned that you have looked into Dogman. Would you mind maybe sharing one of those stories that you've gotten? I have one
in my book of a incident that took place in 2000. I think it was 2013. He was a hunter out in the Adirondacks. It was not too far from Lake Placid, and he was hunting, and he was right along a creek bed, and he had his rifle. It was a .308 rifle that he had with him. I used a different name in the book because he wanted to protect his identity. He just said, hey, you can use my story, just don't use my name. I said, fair enough. So he's walking along. This was deer hunting season, and he sees two dark objects up ahead of him. A couple must have been 300, maybe 400 yards, I guess, what he was telling me. And he's walking towards them thinking, oh, they're probably just campers or hikers, so I'm going to have to walk up to them and tell them I'm in the area hunting, so just, be careful. As he got a little closer to them, he realized, hey, wait, those don't look like people. So he held up his rifle, and he looked at it through the scope because he wanted to get a better look at them. And as he did that, one of them turned around, stood upright directly at him, and started walking towards him. What he describes them to be was basically your upright walking canine. It had a long bushy tail. This one was jet black in color. The other one was had a grayish color to it. Apparently they were feasting over a dead deer carcass, and one of them walked towards him. He said it had the torso of a human, and he said it had arms. These were arms, not frontal limbs.
Oh God!
And the legs he said it looked like his knees were on backwards, which makes perfect sense because if you look at a dog, their legs are not the same as a human. So that does lend some credibility to his claim. And the head looked like a black German Shepherd head. It had the long muzzled nose. It had the pointed ears on top. It had fangs that looked like it would have ripped him in half. And he says he didn't waste any time getting out of there. He turned around and did a 180 as fast as he could. And I asked him if he took a shot at it first. He said no, he was too scared. He didn't know. He wasn't quite sure if that would have been sufficient enough to stop it, or maybe it was just going to piss him off. He just didn't want to chance it.
A human-like torso. That is so creepy.
Yeah, and these creatures of Dogman seem to be more bipedal and quadrupedal. They seem to get down on all fours when they're pursuing something. When they want to go full speed up, like pursuing a vehicle, they get down on all fours and they run like a horse. But most of the time, they claim that they don't have any problems walking upright. One person I was listening to, the country show in Dogman Encounters, and one person claims that he saw one across the river. It was standing on all fours, and it got up on two legs, And as it did that, he could hear what sounded like knuckles popping.
One of the people that I've spoken to was in a truck with the windows down, and he was out there for research reasons, and he actually heard the same thing. Like, it was on all fours, on its haunches, and then as it stood up and kind of unfurled itself, he could hear the joints popping. That just creeps me right out. You know what's really in the story, too? There's two of them. You don't hear that very often.
Are you talking about Bigfoot or Dogman?
Dogman.
In Dogman, I've seen a couple of cases where there were two of them. The guy in my books claims to have saw two of them. It doesn't seem too far fetched, but when dealing with Bigfoot, a lot of these times they sound to be more solitary, where someone will see one of them, but if you see a Bigfoot, you can rest assured that there's at least two or three nearby.
Right.
You may not see them, but they're there somewhere. And if you shoot one, well, you better watch out for the others.
It's like Bigfoot's more tactical with what they do. They kind of always have the sentries, and then one will go do what they need to do while the others are watching. But the Dogman, as we said earlier, they just seem to not give a shit. And if there's a deer carcass, well, if it's a 2-pack or a 3-pack, obviously they're like, well, let's move in. They're very confident in what they do. Not that the Bigfoot aren't. The Bigfoot just do it differently.
Yeah, and if you look at the nature of wolves, some of their behavior, they work together in a pack,
right.
And they also are very brave. Whereas a Sasquatch or human, I think they know when to cut their losses and stay behind, and they are very iffy about confrontational incidents with humans, and they know. They definitely know what a firearm is. And I think they know over through hundreds of years that, humans are the most dangerous animal on the face of this planet.
Yeah. I would agree with that. We're a wreck, and we just consume and destroy everything in our path.
Exactly.
That gentleman, does he still go out hunting? Does he still go out in the woods?
No, he does. This guy that I interviewed, no, he did not. Actually, he says, I'm not going out hunting anymore. He says, I give up. He's like 40-something years old. He said, well, I think I did my time as far as hunting, but I just don't want to do that thing again. And I asked him, I said, would you be willing to take me out there sometime? He goes, you kidding? I wouldn't go back there if the Marines came with me.
Wow. Oh, my gosh. And is this a gentleman that's been hunting most of his life?
Yeah, he lives, I guess he lives in the Adirondacks, just maybe 20 miles away from that site area. And, he says he's been doing that most of his life, but, all it takes is just that one day. It's just,
I think that's out for me. That's on the no list, the Dogman situation. Nah, I'm good on that. Bigfoot, I would love to see a Bigfoot. Although I will say that I think that the ones with, like, the terrifying faces or one that looks more human-faced, I think that would really mess me up. I just have that feeling. I don't know how I'd feel about that.
My theory is, I've had theories where there's 5 different species of Bigfoot, so they're not all the same. Mm-hmm. Got the Yeti up in the Himalayas. That one has been known to be about 6, maybe 7 feet in height. It's very ape-like in nature as far as appearance. And then you got, say, the Florida skunk ape, and you got the Ohio grassman. You got the Fouke monster of Arkansas. These creatures, these Bigfoots in those areas seem to leave behind 3-toe tracks, whereas something up in the woods, up in the mountains, will leave 5 toes. Sometimes they have a mid-tarsal break, sometimes they don't. So there's 2 species right there. The third one would be the one that has the 3-toe tracks. Now, there's a lot of theories behind that being maybe an aquatic ape because they're living in a very swampy region in this area. Until we have a specimen to examine. Again, we can't really say for sure. And then there's what you call the 5th one is what the Native Americans referred to as the Janasquas. Mm-hmm. These seem to be a bit more violent and aggressive, and they're a lot taller. They're a lot larger than the average Bigfoot, and they seem to have a lot of hair on them. And if you go back to the Algonquins and the Iroquois, they referred to them as the stone men of the mountains. Yeah,
I'm in the Bigfoot camp. I'll find the Bigfoot hopefully before a Dogman. Those things are just freaky. I just don't know what to make of those things.
Well, you may not have that option of what you're going to encounter one night. I mean, you go out in the woods looking for a Bigfoot, you might encounter a Dogman.
And so what's your theory on what the hell a Dogman is?
That's a good question, because people ask me all the time. I mean, Linda Godfrey has mentioned it on numerous times of them being the upright walking lines, but what are they beyond that? I think it's another species of canine that just has yet to be discovered. And when you consider about the whole skepticism behind it, first of all, there's hundreds, maybe even thousands of people that are reporting something out there. So there's just way too many reports for something like that not to exist. Now, people were saying for years that the giant squid was something that only existed in Hollywood until one of them washed up on shore.
Right.
As far as Dogman, I don't think we're quite there yet as far as what we can actually theorize what it could be. I'm just going to leave it at it's an undiscovered species of canine. It's more advanced, more intelligent. It's, more evolved than your average dog or wolf.
It just seems like, if those are out there, and it seems like they are, because as you said, we have a lot of reports, it just seems like that's top dog. I don't care what region it's in, it's top dog. Over any other scary predator that you can think of, it takes the cake. That
is the apex predator area.
Yeah.
Everything else is just
staying out of its
inferior.
way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Big boys are home, time to move out. Yeah, I think that it would be top dog. So that's on the no list for me. Well, hey, thanks for sharing those, Jason. I appreciate that. So if you wouldn't mind, let's wrap up with the Bennington Triangle and some of these. We'll swing back to the mysterious disappearances on the Glastonbury Mountain in that range. So
okay.
I have a question before we start, though, and this is something that I just did a cursory search before we hopped on, and it might even be in your book. I don't know, and again, I apologize. I'm normally up on that stuff, but I'm late to the game on this. But have you of the man-eating stone of Glastonbury Mountain?
Yes. Me and a couple of friends have gone out looking for it, and so far we haven't found it.
Thank goodness, right? Because you wouldn't be here to tell it, according to the legend.
Yeah, Joe Citro wrote about that in one of his books, and given that nobody has ever taken an actual photograph of it, I'm thinking that it may be just an urban legend. Mm-hmm.
Because the story is you can step on it and it's all first, but then it turns kind of softer and kind of fleshy, and then you're gone. You get eaten by the rock.
Right, and that kind of just falls into the category of an urban legend. Now, that people are stepping in quicksand, and once they get stuck in there, there's no escaping. I don't know. I mean, we do have quicksand in Vermont.
Where I found the reference to the man-eating stone, which I love little tidbits like that, and even if it's an urban legend, it's pretty cool, right? But this was
they're fun to read.
Yeah, no, they really are, and there was like the whole illustration from that book that you just mentioned about the man-eating rock. But this was under an article on Mysterious Universe that was all about like disappearances, Glastonbury Mountains, which we're going to cover, no, they really are. And there was like the whole illustration from that book that you just mentioned about the man-eating rock. But this was under an article on Mysterious Universe that was all about like disappearances, Glastonbury Mountains, which we're going to cover, which is also in your book. But this is a comment under this article. And it was left several years ago, like 3 years ago, by a man named Michael. And his comment, I go up this mountain often. I have a Jeep equipped for off-road use, and it's a great trail for a Jeep that just keeps going and going for miles. He says, although I have never witnessed anything out of the ordinary on the mountain, it does seem that wildlife is scarce and oddly underpopulated for being an ideal habitat for animals. What I mean is, any other woods in the area, it's not uncommon to see lots of birds, squirrels, white-tailed deer, and of course you would normally see on a daily basis, even in the villages and towns in Vermont. And the thing that gets me is whether it's daytime, nighttime, it's eerily quiet. No birds chirping, and every time I go up the mountain, anyone I'm with, and I, myself, always get that awing, like as if someone is spying on me and or watching us the whole time.
Yeah, and we do have what they call those areas of interest that where things like this happen. going down to Connecticut, there's an area called Dudleytown, and that's more of a people refer to it as being a demonic area. And that's a place where you walk into the woods and you don't even hear any birds chirping.
Oh, man. And they do a lot of satanic worship stuff there?
Well, there was it was a town there at one time. Now the only thing that's remaining there is just it's basically just stone walls and cellar foundations. But apparently there were people that did actually go crazy living in that little village at one time, and they couldn't explain why people were just going insane. So they left the area, and eventually the houses just faded away and diminished. But Vermont has certain areas where you just don't hear any wildlife in the area. Now, what could that be? Well, maybe they just choose to not go there, or maybe there's other areas nearby that has more of what they want for a food supply and more of a lifestyle for them.
Right.
Hard to say.
Well, yeah. Let's touch on at least a couple of the cases, and we're both cool with mentioning David Paulides, and I know he had a few of these names at least in his books. But if you wanted to bring up a couple of the cases, these odd disappearances on Glastonbury Mountain.
Sure. There were a few of them that really strike my interest in them. Now, this is, in the state of Vermont, this is a area that during a 24-year time frame of disappearances took place between 1926 and 1950. After 1950, all the activity stopped. One of the more famous cases was Mitty Rivers. He vanished in November of 1945. He was a 70-year-old hunter. One night he was taking a group of people up into the mountains for a tour. Now this guy, a little story on him, he was local, lived there all his life. So he had no purpose, or he had no reason to be lost. And as they were going the long trail, I guess he got a little too far ahead of the group, and they searched around and they looked, and his body was never found. Now, according to the locals, he was an avid huntsman, so he lived his whole life in the area. There was one particular piece of evidence that was found behind, and it was a bullet shell from his rifle, indicating that he may have shot something, even though nobody claims to have heard the gun behind. They were theorized that he was walking by the creek and saw what appeared to be maybe a threat, and he maybe attempted to take a shot at it, and whatever it was consumed him. Paula Weldon. Paula Weldon is really more the more famous ones of the case. Paula was an 18-year-old college student. She was going to Bennington College, and December 1st of 1946, she decided to the Glastonbury Mountains as to hike the Long Trail, not too far from where Mitty Rivers had vanished. And as she was walking, she had blue jeans, sneakers, and a red jacket. Now, if you stop and pause for a minute, she had a bright red jacket on. Most of the people that are vanishing, from what David Paulides was claiming, seemed to be wearing bright red, flashy colors.
Right.
So, as she was going up the trail, she was probably like maybe 4:30 in the afternoon, where she ran into a couple of people that was coming down the hill. So they were able to confirm her whereabouts of the area. And she asked them, how long does it take to make it to the summit of the mountain? And they recommended that she not do that because, there's a storm coming. Again, people vanish right before bad weather.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the last anyone saw from her. Her body was never found. Now, ironically enough, her disappearance led to the formation of the Vermont State Police. Because before that, an awakening for the state saying, hey, we need to get up to speed with the rest of the states around here. But then we have, one of the interesting ones is Carl Herrick. And Carl was a hunter, not really in the mountains, but just outside the outskirts of the area. And he was a hunter, avid hunter, and he was hunting with his cousin one day, and this was November 23rd of 1943. He was 37 years old. He split up with his cousin, and they agreed to meet back at a certain area. Now, when he didn't show up, his cousin got a little worried, and they decided to call in the search and rescue. And I guess a 3-day search went on, and they eventually, on the third day, they found his body that was laying face down in the snow. His rifle was found 75 yards away from the body, leaning up against a tree. Again, there was a bullet shell fragment laying on the ground, indicating that he may have shot at something. He had bruises on his hands, and when they did an autopsy, they discovered that he was squeezed to death.
Oh, God.
So basically, his rib cage was punctured, and it punctured his lung. Now, if that was a bear, they were trying to pass it off as a bear, by the way. Bears don't squeeze their victims. They would just claw them and rip them to shreds. Sting, whatever it was, grabbed him and squeezed him. So there was no claw marks. There was no bite marks on his body anywhere.
I find the fact that the rifle was, just as if you would set a rifle down against a tree, so there's dirt in the muzzle, and, you take care of your guns, and that's what you do. So It doesn't seem like he would have been in a situation where he would just casually set his rifle against a tree, especially if he had already expended a round. It would be tossed on the ground somewhere. It's just really propped up against a tree.
And that's one of the things that doesn't make sense, because as a hunter, that's something you would never do. You always want to keep your rifle in hand for safety purposes. So, again, there's numerous theories and speculations as to what could have transpired, but it's one of those things that we'll just never know.
I mean, it almost sounds like, if we're not going to just point the finger right at Bigfoot or something, but it sounds exactly like what happened to that Diallo Pass, right? Like the compression injuries, he had bruises on his hands, and his rib cage is just all crushed, and internal injuries, and that's exactly what happened to those folks.
And again, it was another case involving a person by the name of Alfred Bishop, who disappeared November 3rd in 1926 in the town of Reading, Vermont, which is just 17 miles away from where Carl Herrick had vanished. It's a 17-year difference between the two, but it's maybe 20 miles apart from each other. Well, Alfred Bishop, rather. Alfred Bishop disappeared under virtually the same circumstances as Carl Herrick did. They were hunting with a friend, and now the thing with Alfred is that when his body was found days later, it was found on an old abandoned logging road, and what they found was that he had a skull fracture and his neck was broken in 4 places, and his belongings were scattered all over the place. His rifle was somewhere, yards away from him. His boots were on the ground. His gloves were, and hat and jacket just scattered and dispersed all over the area.
And was he torn up at all, as if he was, clawed by a bear?
No, he was actually found in a ditch just outside an old, logging road. I don't remember as to who discovered him. The specifics are a bit unclear, but when they did an autopsy on him, they found that the cause of death was, his neck was broken in 4 different places, and he had a skull fracture.
Yes. It is really specific. I mean, when bears do their business, it's messy, and it's all over the place, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, all you have to do is watch The Revenant, and, that's exactly what happened to that guy. He got really screwed with the bear, and it was, back, legs, arms, head, the whole 9. So somebody really tried to dispatch Alfred really quickly. Yeah, and it's almost as if he just dumped there just to view or to find, because they claim that they've already searched that area, but lo and behold, days later they found his remains. Area previously searched. Interesting. I forgot about that with Alfred. Right.
Yeah. And again, these are the cases where they're so weird and so bizarre. Some of the things that are in the case just don't make any sense.
It's one thing to, even though this is weird enough, this is strange enough, but if you search an area and then there's no body and then there's a body, but we're talking about a body plus all of his belongings, his rifle, and whatever else is scattered around, for all of that just to show back up in the area on top of the actual corpse, how do you even begin to explain that?
Yeah, and, how do you theorize as to what may have happened? Who are you going to point the finger at as the suspects are concerned? eventually a lot of those theories are going to get shot down. Well, it couldn't have been a bear. I mean, what is a bear going to take him away and bring him back? And, so you tend to look at more of the human element as to, who wanted him dead once. But then again, then that kind of just turns up empty because there was no one that actually wanted him dead. And then there's people that would have been just virtually impossible for them to pull something like that off. The case of Holden, back in the 1940s, for someone to snatch someone off of a trail, well, you're out in the middle of the woods, and, once you grab someone, what are you going to do with them? Where are you going to go with them? I mean,
Right.
People weigh a lot, And for a 5-star athlete back in the 1940s to have done that, they probably would have even had a hard time kidnapping someone and taking them away. It just seems like more of an impossibility than anything else.
Right. Like, why go to that terrain? Knowing that there are other people around. I mean, she ran into 2 people on the way up there.
Right.
Yeah, I don't...
And you have Frida Langer, who was, this was back in October 28, 1950. She was a 53-year-old woman, by the way, from North Adams, Mass. And she was coming up to I guess they had a cabin up there. And she had a cousin that she went with. And they went out, well, Frida's husband stayed behind in the cabin. So it was really just her and her cousin out. So they decided to, walk and venture out in the area. I guess Frida slipped and fell into the creek and got wet. So she said, "All right, I'm going to go back and I'm going to get a change of clothing." Now she turned around and walked back towards the camp, and the cousin of hers just kept on going. And when he came back to the camp, he says, "Well, where's Frida?" And I said, "I don't know. I thought she was with you." So long story short, that turned into a big search. She was never found. And 8 months later, her remains were found. Basically, I think it was May 4th, to be exact, if my memory serves me correctly. 2 fishermen were fishing a spot just 3 miles away from the cabin of where she had vanished.
Oh, my God.
And they found, what they found was her remains. And I guess they found a full, but later on they determined that she died of exposure, which is just ridiculous because there's no way they could have known. But this is one of those cases where they vanished and they're found in an area that was unsearched.
Yeah, especially being that close to the cabin where she was staying. I mean, they probably would have searched there, maybe even the best.
Oh, they would have searched the entire, maybe a whole 10-mile radius, I would imagine.
That's
I
unbelievable.
mean, we went for days and they came up empty.
Right.
And then there's the famous James Thetford case, where James Thetford was coming from St. Albans, Vermont. He took a bus down south into Bennington. For those that don't know where Bennington is, it's located on the southern part of Vermont. So James Thetford was on a bus. He was a soldier. He was a soldier from World War II, and he was coming home to family. And bus drivers claim that they remember him getting off the bus, but where he went from that is really unknown, because he was another one that was never found. And ironically, his disappearance was 3 years to the calendar after Paula Weldon's case.
Only 3 months.
Yeah. No, 3 years.
Oh, 3 years. Okay.
3 years. 3 years right today.
Mm. Yeah.
Now,
sorry, that part, Skype kind of dropped out for a second. Yeah, 3 years to the day.
Yeah.
This guy goes. Okay.
And that, again, you have to ask yourself, was incidents that something like that happened during that time period, or was there something going on in that area that we haven't really put our finger on just yet?
How old was James?
I'm saying I haven't really looked into his personal background. I'm saying that he was probably in his 20s, because after all, he was was there something going on in that area that we haven't really put our finger on just yet?
How old was James?
I'm saying I haven't really looked into his personal background. I'm saying that he was probably in his 20s, because after all, he was a military veteran at the time.
These poor folks, man. I mean, if what you mentioned about the fact that the coroners, or whatever they might have been called back then. I don't know if it was coroners or not, but they said it was due to exposure. You're like going, really? Like you said, like how would you know that? There's bones.
Yeah, exactly.
How would you know that?
And well, I think that goes back to what a New York detective said years ago, local reports for local consumption, which basically all it means is that anytime you have something, a case that's so disturbing, coroners will come up with a verdict that cannot be substantiated no matter what they say.
Right.
Now, ironically, if you can get a second opinion, but in today's world, it's expensive. It's like $5,000-$6,000. 85% of the time when you do that, the result from a second opinion is the exact polar opposite from the original.
Yeah.
So that's something to consider.
Right. Some of these cases are so frustrating, though. You just go, how is that even possible?
Yeah. The question is, how come they weren't brought into the public light sooner than that? I mean, unfortunately, it takes somebody like David Paulides in order to bring that into the public awareness.
I forget, did any of these actually make the papers big time when they happened?
Yes, the Paula Weldon case did. That was the more famous one.
Yeah.
Her case did. Who else was there? There was Paul Jepson, who was an 8-year-old boy. His was in the paper. He disappeared, and that kid was never found. And he was actually found, he actually disappeared on October 12th, 1950, missing from the Bennington dump, which his disappearance was just a couple of miles away from where Paul Weldon disappeared. So the area of where they vanished was within close proximity of each other. Now, Paul Jepson, the 8-year-old boy, was wearing a bright red jacket. And Paula Weldon was wearing a red jacket. They both vanished within a 2-mile radius proximity of each other.
Oh, God.
And neither one of them were ever found.
Right.
Now, there's been theories on serial killers or crazy people in the woods. First of all, when you study serial killers, a lot of them, they have a certain preference of how they choose their victims.
Mm-hmm.
These people here, these were male, these were female. The age range came from 8 years old to 75 years old, so that throws that theory out the window. The only thing that the only connection that these people have is that their vanishing took place between October, November, and December within a 24-year time period.
I forgot about... So, October, November, all of these people?
Yes.
Oh, my gosh.
And I say it kind of raises the question of what was going on in that era back then as opposed to today.
And you said it all stopped in 1950.
1950.
Mm-hmm.
We did have a more recent case back in 2016.
Oh.
There was a college student, Hadil Marzouk, I think her name is. She was a 21-year-old college student. She was going to Bennington College. She was I believe she was from Afghanistan. She was an exchange student. She was found in the Dorset Quarry, which is not too far from the Bennington Mountain. I guess she got in her car and she told the people that she was living with that she was going out. And this was a Saturday. Mm-hmm. She didn't come home that night, so they called in the state police the next day. 3 days later, her body was found in the Dorset Quarry because her car was parked not too far from there. Now, got in the quarry is anyone's guess.
Yeah, or why? Why would she go in there?
Well,
she's saying she's going out, and how do you end up in that area?
And that's one of the mysteries of some scary cases, but when you look at it from a skeptical standpoint, it did happen in December. So if someone wants to label it as a suicide, well, suicide rates are always at its highest around the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that could be a possibility, kind of, sort of, maybe. But
was there anything? I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you. Go ahead, Jason.
The only problem with that theory is that if she wanted to, end her life, why would she choose to jump off a quarry and into the water? I mean, when guys choose to refer to or result to suicide, a lot of times they shoot themselves. There's usually a firearm involved.
Mm-hmm.
When women choose to end their life, one of the top methods they use is by taking pills.
Was there anything strange about her clothes, or was there any tie-ins with, Red Jacket, or it's December? So is there any other tie-ins with the other folks? And her was the story, which comes up a lot in the 411 stuff.
I don't know what she was wearing that night. I think she had a red car, but as far as what her attire was that night, they weren't really her.
It's interesting about the red, because it seems like red would keep you, in a lot of, if you're a hunter, the brighter the colors, the safer you are, and it would, you'd be more visible to most people that might be in the area, but it seems like it's the opposite in these cases. Like, it just paints you a big red target, right? It's yellow or red, and it's a lot of bright colors, basically, that get these and across the board.
That seems to be the proverbial bullseye target that you're wearing when you go into the woods by wearing a bright red shirt or jacket. There was somebody once told me that in the country of Indonesia, the local villagers there told their kids, don't ever go into the woods wearing red, because then the woods will take you and swallow you alive.
Interesting. I've never heard that. So, that is very interesting. So it's a thought of, when they say the woods, quote unquote, it's a creature in the woods, or the woods themselves kind of have this rule and they're alive and you just won't come back.
Yeah, that's hard to actually put an answer on, because a lot of these people, they're, the villagers, they're not really, fluent, educated as well. When they say the woods, that could mean a number of different things. So it's hard to actually be able to decide what they're actually making reference to.
You know what it reminds me of? Have you ever seen the movie The Village by M. Night Shyamalan?
No, but I know of it. I missed that one.
Yeah, the creature actually wears a massive red cloak. And red is kind of... Yeah, like, once you get to the red portions, it's kind of like, oh, you're getting into bad territory. But yeah, the quote-unquote creature actually wears this massive red cloak. So that's pretty interesting, actually. I'm going to look into that.
That seems to be the color of choice when it comes to that kind of activity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is so interesting, Jason. I've never heard that about that Indonesian aspect. I'm going to look into that. That is so cool. Maybe we can have someone email me or let me know what the deal is with that, or if they know more about that folklore in Indonesia.
Yeah, I've always wanted to know more about that.
Yeah. Well, gosh, you're a pleasure to talk to. Thank you so much. You're very knowledgeable, and I will be getting your book because I want to read about the other aspects that we didn't talk about. You covered tonight, and I appreciate that. Your book is available in Kindle and paperback, I saw, right? On Amazon.
Yeah, I would recommend the paperback, because I'm going to be doing away and deleting the Kindle. I just wasn't happy with the way it came out, so I would recommend the back version.
Always better to have that hard copy in your hands anyway, right? That's how I feel.
I'm kind of an old-fashioned guy. Yeah. I like books. I have tons of books in the room that they're just books. They're not Kindle.
The only exception that I have is at night, I like to, I'll lay down, I'll get in bed, and I have my Kindle so that, I don't fall asleep with the light on. You have to wake up again, shut the light off. So the Kindle, I love at night. I put it in night mode, and I'm reading my Stephen King right now. Really smart to read that before bed, by the way. But that's kind of my nightly ritual. But other than that, it's all paperback. So I'll definitely be picking that up. Again, guys, that is Vermont Bigfoot Encounters and Beyond. Jason, will you please mention the Facebook page again, or any other pertinent social media things that people need to know about?
Sure. It's Vermont Bigfoot Research Group, and the book is available on Amazon. It's $16.95. So if you have anything you'd like to reach out to me for, just send me a message to the Vermont Bigfoot Group in the Facebook page. Awesome.
Sounds like you're doing really good research out there in Vermont, kind of keeping your ear to the ground, your boots on the ground too. It's cool that you're going out and visiting folks and doing that research. So if there's any anything in the future, kind of to update? I mean, I would love to hear more about what's going on with that family, the teachers that moved there with the 9-year-old, and I don't know, are you working on maybe a new book in the future?
I'm probably not going to include them in a book. I mean, I am working on another book, only this time I'm focusing on the Adirondacks.
Cool.
So I am going to come out with one for Bigfoot in the Adirondacks. I probably, most likely, will have a chapter in Vermont in that book, because in this Vermont Bigfoot Encounters, I have a chapter dedicated to New York, which strictly focuses mainly around Whitehall. So I do kind of like a switch off between the two. I'm probably not going to include her story because they don't really want their names to be put out there. In fact, I'm not even going to mention their location.
Well, yeah, but, whenever you're ready to promote that book, let me know. You're absolutely welcome back on.
That might be a while, but I will definitely run that by you.
Oh, that's okay. Hey, I'll need stories a year or two or however long it is down the road, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, hey, Jason, thank you so much. We'll be in touch. I appreciate your time.
Oh, well, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so-and-so. I was given this name by my parents. I've been to such and such a college. I've done these things in my profession. I produce a little biography. Buddha says, forget it. That's not true. That's some story. That's all gone. That's all past. I want to see the real you are now. Well, nobody knows who that is. Because we don't know ourselves except through listening to our echoes and consulting our memories. But then there's a real you, and that again leads us back to this question. Who are you? That is the real you. We shall see how they play with this exam by the koans to get you to come out of your shell and find out who you really are. They will say reincarnation means this, that if you sitting here now are really convinced that you're the same person who walked in at the door half an hour ago, you're being reincarnated. If you are liberated, you'll understand that you're not. The past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. There is only the present. That's the only real you that there is. The Zen master Dogman put it in this way. He said, spring does not become summer. First there is summer, and then there is spring.